These past 2 weeks have been a lot slower than the first 2 weeks, but let's just jump into what happened. No need to spend forever on the opening. So let's go to Part 1, Scriptable Objects. I first started by making something called a scriptable object, which allows you to be able to make things a lot faster by giving an object and changing some of the preset settings that are changed globally instead of having to change like individual objects for the entire game. I use this system for items because I can then just give things a weight and a mesh and I don't have to completely delete the object. I can just hide it and then unhide it with a new scriptable object if you drop a new coin, for example. And I don't have time to explain. That'll keep the game from lagging because deleting and adding new objects is slow. It's complicated. I don't even understand why. Part 2. Picking items up. Another advantage of scriptable objects is when managing inventories are a lot simpler because you just need to track the scriptable object. You don't need to track every individual setting for that specific item. So all I need to do is add the item scriptable object to a list and I'll hide the object if you try to pick it up. Originally, I was going to make it so they could pick up the objects using a similar system to the push and pull selection, but in the end I did a ray cast coming from the camera, and if it hits an object, then you pick it up. I decided to use that instead of the other system because when you use the other system, you have to look directly at the center of the object, which is ineffective because you can't see a line connecting to the center of the object like you can with pushing and pulling. And after that, I decided to work on something that's really to blame for my slow progress over the last 2 weeks. I mean, not really now that I've thought about it more, because I did get substantially too far into reading Way of Kings for the first time. I haven't had Words of Radiance come yet. It's gonna arrive today of uploading, tomorrow as of recording. Yeah, the reason why I'm blaming it, in my script at least, is Part 3, Keep Venture. I decided that I wanted to work on some 3D modeling, so I made a 3D model of what I think Keep Venture looks like. I also used some visual references that other people did. Some of the things are obviously not looking as they should, like the windows. They're just purple right now, but you know, that sounds like a future me problem. But, oh, I did get the scale of the building correct, though. It's absolutely massive. It's substantially too big. It's way bigger than it should be. And the upper 2 stories are just gonna have Kellic knows what on them because there's just too much space. I don't know what to put in all of the space. There's so much space, I do not know what to put in all of it. There's a point where you don't need more space nobles, but in order to make the building the proper size from the inside and the outside and everything look properly, I needed all of this space. So I just have to suffer. So yeah, in the end, my plan is to, like nobles, just go unreasonable with the size of things. I originally made a plan for what was going to be on each of the floors. I have to scrap that plan because there is too much space for me to do that. Like, I can't have a room that's like, oh god, it would be so big. I can't do that. Rooms can't be that big. Okay, rooms shouldn't be that big when they're supposed to be like a person's room. I do think this is a better backdrop for testing than before, but I still do need to add some chandeliers. I do that later, but I don't make like models for it. I just add the lights, and I also need to add the rails at the balcony level. Part 4, item weight. I decided to make some sense to this game and not just have a set carry weight, and instead make it so that weight slowly adds debuffs and buffs. So as you pick up more things, you're interrelation with your strength. So if you like flare pewter, it becomes less. It slows you down. I'm going to make it so it affects jump height too. Just haven't gotten around to that because I have too many things to do. It also is used when calculating like your push-pull weight. So if you carry something that's really heavy, you can now pull heavy things towards you without like getting flung towards them. Though, it's surprising how much weight you need to carry in order to like make a block fly towards you with nothing. And even with all of that, really nothing happens because you pull on it and the weight's so heavy that inertia doesn't let it move. It's a whole ordeal, really. But regardless, there are both benefits and downsides to having a large weight, which is a very important thing to include in a game where weight's very important. So this brings us to part 5, inventory UI. After that, I decided to actually make the inventory UI so you can see things that you're carrying. I made 3 menus. Well, I thought of 3 menus to make. So far, I've only made one of them, the miscellaneous menu, which shows everything and its mesh, which I made it go very spin. I also made it so it shows some stats at the bottom of the screen, which results in this overwhelming is all ruined menu that, you know, makes it a bit hard to see things, but includes all the important stats, you know, weight, health, stamina, heat, hunger, thirst, boxing clip count, and also the unimportant stat of breath. You don't need to know that stat very frequently, but it's still on there, and I don't know what else to put on there. so it stays for now. I also made it so you can see a stat that I haven't talked about yet called reputation, which is the closest thing to a level you have within the game. It shows how good you are in like social interactions without the usage of allomancy, which brings me to the original reason why I made an inventory system. It's no longer connected to the inventory system. I didn't have time. The book truly took over my life. I read like a solid quarter of the book in like 4 days. I'd help. Brandon Sanderson, you write too fast, and I read too fast. You need to stop. Part 6, social interactions. Now, I wish I could say that social interactions are why it took so long, but really, this only took 3 of the last 2 weeks, despite the fact it's a half of my video, or at least in terms of script, it's a half of my script. But anyways, I started by making it so that you could look at a person and press the same button that's used for picking up items, which I set to Eve right now, but it's currently just the same button they use for picking up items. And now, it makes you look at the That's not right. Okay, let's try that. It's somehow more wrong. What in the preservation is happening? Okay, so for those who don't know, there are these things called quaternions, which handle 3D rotations, and they are the actual worst. You see, quaternions, they're 4-dimensional. I don't like trying to think about how this works. I've watched videos. I cannot process what they do. They're just little magic machines that handle rotation. People smarter than me know it, so I ignore it. But in the end, to fix this problem, what I did was I just did a little... I still had to change like 90% of that code in order to get it to work, but it kept you from pivoting the camera, which was not helpful, but it works. Now, not the most smoothly, but it does work. I don't question why things are working the way they do. I do know exactly why this is working the way it does, but I can't be bothered with fixing that at this moment. So this is what I got. And if you don't like that, then that sounds like your problem, honestly. Anyways, after that, I decided to make a menu that displayed the NPC text, the NPC name, and player responses. This does limit me to 4 responses, but I think trying to display more responses than 4 is going to be too overwhelming. But that's a future me problem if I ever do decide to change it. So let's, like a lot of things, ignore it for now. Anyways, I then made it so that you could then move your cursor and click it and then select one of those responses. Or if it's in the center, just close the dialogue. I then decided that you should easily be able to push and smooth on people's emotions from within the menu. Why did I write push and smooth? I thought I should have said riot and smooth or push and pull. Script writing me is not the brightest sometimes. I wrote this today. Am I okay? So first I made it so that brass and zinc reserves are shown on the screen, and then I swapped the burn strength and reserves relative to the burn strength selection menu because it's way more important to know how much you have left for pushing and pulling than the amount that you have left or the strength that you're using it at. I also made it so that when you change the push-pull strength of emotions, which I've not talked about yet, it automatically changes the burn strength. Instead of making it so that you have to control burn strength and the motion strength, it's very complicated. I made it so that there are buttons that allow you to easily control whether or not you have your copper cloud up, whether or not you have Duralumin flare. So part 6.5, zinc and brass. So for this, I decided to keep things simple because emotional allomancy is by far the most complicated type of allomancy, because while steel and iron were annoying, I could implement them in their entirety with little compromises on how they worked. On the other hand, emotional allomancy required me to make compromises on how to control the emotions, unless I started working with ChatGPT for this. The biggest compromise I made was that in social encounters, there are only 2 emotion stats that you can actually manipulate, anger and pride. That's because the most emotional changes change these 2 as like the displayed emotions, like low self-esteem or really like humble and depressed, all like show in similar ways unless that emotion is really extreme. Now, don't get me wrong, I knew I needed to make it so smoothing and rioting to have similar effects because they did very clearly mention that, and I didn't want to have to compromise on that level. So I made it so that there are 4 emotions you can affect, but each one affects 2 stats. So in the end, the emotions are pride, humility, and anger, patience. And then that just affects the 2 stats, emotion stats of pride and anger. I then also made another compromise that boosts perceived realism, and definitely is not just me being lazy. It's not stating a tone or like I'm planning on not having voice acting, because if you have voice acting or if you get to know the tone, then it can feel off if like pushing on their anger and then like they sound kind of prideful. Like it can sound a bit off if you're pushing on anger, pulling on it's not impossible, it just feels a bit off if like I share between emotions. And if you even if it's the same text. But if I don't say the tone and don't have voice acting, then the words displayed on the screen, the player will read it knowing what they're pushing and pulling on and read it in the appropriate tone. Or at least I hope they will. I then also made so if you push too strongly on their emotions, it would trigger them to stop like using their emotions in determining how they talk to you, because they know that you're an Allomancer. At that point they'd be like, I can't trust my emotions right now when I'm deciding how to talk. I'm gonna ignore them. And then each person can have a different strength for how well they are at detecting your push and pull. So like Inquisitors would be really effective, and then Obligators, I think are what they call it. I never know. My brain just can't process the word. Every single time I looked at it when I was reading the series, my brain was like, that's different. I know what word that is. It doesn't have a pronunciation anymore. Anyways, but yeah, each person has a different ability to like detect it. And that brings me to all the basic allomancies done. I got iron, steel, pewter, tin, zinc, brass, copper, bronze. Surprised I remember all that off the top of my head. But I'm kind of running low on time because I do need to still do editing, and it's already 3 o'clock today. So let's just move on to part 7. Next steps. For most of my planning from part 1 still fits here. I never got shop set up from the past 2 weeks, so I might want to work on that first. I also do want to work on the outside keep venture because I did kind of just abandon that like after the first week because I realized it was going way too slow. I also do need to add things to upper floors because they are criminally bare right now. I do worry about working on art because it is a lot slower and has a lot less to talk about within video games than like the game design itself. I also still have the 2 temporal medals and the 2 enhancement medals to work on, plus Adium, which, much like the being it came from, will be the ruin of me. Regardless, the fact that half of this episode was made in the past 3 days really shows the 2 biggest problems I have with making progress right now. The first one is reading the Cosmere, because I got too much into Way of Kings. It was too much. I only made substantial progress once I finished the book, and my copy of Word of Radiance will be arriving the day after this is uploaded, so this project is in jeopardy with my attention span. But moving onward, my other problems, the other reason that half of this video was made in the past 3 days, is 2 of those days were the weekend. And the first time I had a weekend to work on this, I spent it all making the storyboard. So, like, no one has watched that though. So from now on, my devlog will be scheduled every 2 weeks, and unless I have some loafer thing to put in between those weeks, I will just remain silent, or just put in a community post, because I just send random things in my community posts at this point. I will use the extra time to work on the game, or read Word of Radiance if I get distracted. But anyways, that's all for this devlog. See you 2 weeks from now, signing off, or hopefully not the last time, someone who is never on topic.